Greetings! In this video we will use our Lego style bricks as a means of reviewing the interface. We will use these geometry to practice using our transform tools, and then I will introduce us to duplication, grid snapping, and applying colors or shaders. And once you're able to duplicate, snap, and apply color, you'll be able to create a custom scene, which is our objective for this week's lesson. Let's get started. First, let's make sure that our interface is the same. We're working in Maya Classic, and not a bad idea for these first few lessons to hit the preferences icon and hit restore default settings. Today we're going to be using the channel box, and note that we can minimize or maximize the channel box by clicking the tab, and this icon here will turn the channel box off or on completely. Likewise, on the outliner, we can minimize or maximize the outliner. And if we click this icon here, we can turn the outliner completely off, or of course, bring it back. So we have the outliner available to us on the left. We have the channel box available to us on the right. Here we have our transform tools, and that corresponds to the keyboard. A quick reminder, the Q key is our select tool. The W key is our translate or move tool. The E key corresponds to the rotate tool, and R is a shortcut for scale. Let's go ahead and talk about our axis direction. Remember that positive Z is forward and positive X is on our left-hand side. If I were to select this angled brick, we can see that it is 6 units out on the X. If I click the plate, I can see that it's negative 6 units on the X in that direction. If we were to pick this central cube, it's currently at the origin, but I could pull it forward and now it's 7.6 units on the Z, or we could push it backwards. Now it's negative 10.839 in the Z. I'll hit undo twice just to get that back to its original position. And it can be confusing as an introductory student to know or to remember that we want to work Z forward. Right? This would be the rear of the scene, and I've purposefully placed this angled brick here so that we can remember which way is forward. Positive Z forward. Let's take a quick review of the transform tools. I'm going to grab the move tool, or the W key, and let's say we selected our plate. Now currently the Z is yellow, which means it's constrained on that axis direction. And I would be constrained on the Z, and you see that only the Z value is changing. I can constrain myself on the Y, and only the Y value is changing, and of course the X. But we want to place these bricks very precisely, so we will be grid snapping on only one axis at a time. We engage the grid snapping by holding the X key. So, right, I'm on the X axis, and I can click and drag, and you can see I've input the value now, negative 8.042. I'll hit undo. If I do that while holding down the X key, now it's giving me only whole numbers. Negative 9, negative 10, negative 11. And I can be very precise with the position of the geometry that I am transforming, in this case translating. So just a quick review, if I click it in the middle, and I see all three colors, I'm changing all three values at once. I'm going to tap the Z key to get that back, or I can click on a particular axis and I'm limited to that axis. So take a moment and practice with each of the tools, the translate, the rotate, and the scale. Practice constraining, and then practice moving omnidirectionally so until you get a sense or a feel for the difference. What we're going to do here is make some duplicates, and we'll just make a stack of duplicated bricks here, and that will give you an opportunity to practice using the transform tools and then using them in conjunction with grid snapping, as well as inputting whole numbers or half units into the translate. Let's duplicate this. I have selected my existing angled brick, and we'll come up to edit, duplicate. And note that all of the keyboard shortcuts are listed here. So if I want to use the keyboard shortcut for duplicate, I can hit Command D on the Mac to duplicate that. But I'll do it the long way in the menu items so that you can see what I'm up to. I'm going to say Edit Duplicate, and it doesn't appear as though anything happened because they're sitting in the exact same place. The outliner shows me that I went from having 3 geometry to having 4. So now I could slide that out of the way, right? I can move this over here. I'm going to grid snap it. So I'm going to hold down the X key and we'll grid snap that over. And then I want to grid snap it up. Now in the perspective view here, I don't have a grid in the Y direction. So this means that we have to jump into an orthographic view. The space bar, I'll tap the space bar, and that minimizes or maximizes the particular view that you are currently in. So I can minimize or maximize the perspective view, and that's switching between my single view and my 4 view. A quick word on the orthographic views. I have a top, front, and side orthographic view, and that just means that there is no third dimension. So here I'm just looking at the X and the Z. The Y is not available to me. In the front view, I'm seeing the Y and the X, and the Z is not available to me. And in the side view, I can see the Z and the Y, but the X is not available. And this means that let's jump into the front view, tap that space bar, and I'll grid snap this up 1 unit. So now it's sitting exactly on the plate. I've moved it up exactly 1 unit on the Y by holding the X key and clicking on the Y. And you can practice that. I'm holding the X key, and you see that it is limiting me in 2 ways. I'm limited to the Y because I made that arrow active, and I'm limited to the grid because I'm holding the X key. And I can grid snap that, and now that angled brick is sitting exactly on the plate. I also want to move it forward. I could move it forward in the side view, but I wanted to show you in the perspective view, if I click on that Z-axis, now I'm limited, and I can grid snap forward. If I hadn't touched that, and I was seeing all 3 colors, and I used the grid snap in the perspective view, and I went to grid snap, it's going to snap down to the grid. So you have those 2 options. You can limit yourself here by clicking on the arrow, holding the X key, and then clicking the arrow, holding the X key, and pulling it forward. Or you could jump into the side view, and this is right, 4 is wireframe, 5 is shaded. So I'm in the 4 view here, and we could grid snap it here. But you see that it's a half unit off. So it's either a half unit beyond or a half unit short. So what would we do? Well, what axis are we on? We're on the Z axis. And so 2 units on the Z is short, 3 units on the Z is long, and so let's manually type in 2.5. And now that's sitting exactly where it would be if these were actual bricks. Let's make a duplicate of this one since it's already in place. We'll hit Edit, Duplicate, and again, if I grid snap this back, we can have it sitting exactly there, but it's a half unit too far, right? Here I'm holding the X key, half unit too short. We're working on the Z, so in this case, we would say negative 2.5. And now that's sitting exactly there, sitting exactly on that plate. Now, let's say we wanted to rotate this around. What axis would that be? A lot of times as you're getting familiar with the axis directions, eventually you'll remember these. But you can just begin to rotate and see which axis you need. So I wanted to turn this around. I'm imagining that I didn't know exactly which axis it was. So I'm on just this ring. Now that I see it, it's rotate Y, I could just type in 180. And now it's sitting back to back. And let's place this one on top, just for the heck of it. We could place this one or we could duplicate it. Let's go ahead and duplicate it. And let's do this in an orthographic view so you can appreciate the grid snapping. So I'm holding down the X key and I can click up and pull it over. And we've set that duplicate there, and that's sitting exactly on top. So go ahead and practice that. Practice using the grid. These will all fit together using the grid, either with a whole number, or in this case a 2.5, a half unit, a whole number and then a 0.5 if they are not sitting exactly where you would like them. So practice that, and then the final thing that we'll talk about is applying some color. And this is pretty straightforward. Shading can get very complex and very convoluted, but for today, the only attribute we're going to change on the shader is the color, which is a pretty straightforward process. So let's say we want this to be red. I'll select this piece and right-click and pull down to Assign New Material. Assign New Material. Right-click, pull down to Assign New Material. Now it pops up. We're going to use two systems of shading, lighting, and rendering. The Maya native system, and then there is a third-party system which is more advanced, more realistic, Arnold. We'll be talking about both, and most of the advantage goes to Arnold, but for simplicity's sake, the Maya default is straightforward. And so for beginners, I'll oftentimes use the Maya setup, though we will in this semester be using both Maya and Arnold. So I've clicked on Maya. This shows me all the Maya shaders, and we'll limit ourselves just to 3 this semester. The Lambert shader is a flat, the Phong is a plastic, and the Blinn is metallic. So as we think about these toy pieces, they are plastic, so we would choose a Phong. So we'll click Phong there, and our attribute editor opens up. So we were working in the channel box. I've applied a shader to this particular geometry, and it automatically opened up my attribute editor. But it didn't dump me in the right place, which is a little bit funny. Here, this is like looking under the hood of the geometry. The final tab out, in this case the third tab out of my attribute editor, is that Phong that I just created. So your shader is always the last tab in the attribute editor if you're reading from left to right. It is the rightmost tab in the attribute editor. Here is that Phong that I just applied, and I'll click in the field, and let's make it a red type of color. Make it a little kind of darker red. Let's review. Let's make this guy yellow. We'll right click, pull down to Assign New Material, and we'll choose Phong. Now in this case it did, because that was a duplicate, it had fewer attributes, and so it did dump us on the Phong here. And let's click on the color field and let's make that yellow. We'll click on this, I'll dolly around. We'll right click, pull down to Assign New Material, and we'll choose Phong. And let's make this white. We'll click on the color and we'll just choose white. And let's make that bottom one, let's say for instance blue. We'll right click. Let me zoom out so you can see this. Now my soft select was on. Let me tap the B key to get out of that. Right click, pull down to Assign New Material. We'll choose Phong. We're in the attribute editor, furthermost tab to the right. We'll click that and we'll make that blue. And you can begin to build out a little scene with these 3 pieces, grid snapping them together, duplicating, grid snapping them together, using the channel box if you need to put in a 0.5 to make things line up. And then we're simply right clicking the shape, pulling down to Assign New Material, and in the attribute editor, finding that and then assigning color. Now if you wanted to make a change, let's say we wanted this to be black, we can right click it and pull down to Material Attributes. So the entry above Assign New Material, we can pull down to Material Attributes. Now this opened up the attribute editor, and again my shader is the furthest out, and there is that blue that I assigned, and I could change that. Let's say we wanted that to be black, or let's say we wanted this one to be blue. We can right click, pull down to Material Attributes, it opens up, and we could change that color that way. So give that a shot. You're opening the file, you're using this to review the interface, to practice using your transform tools, to use grid snapping to snap your duplicates into place and then applying shaders. Questions in the discussion forum? Have a good one.